Hi guys, it's Nila here again on behalf of Worldbuilding Cafe on YT. Today we are going to talk about a very important part, in my opinion, of writing a work, which is world building and consistency and character moral codes. Speaking as someone who writes majoritarily historical fiction as well as mythological fiction, world building is a very intrinsic part of my work, because the characters I write and the situations that happen are catered specifically to that particular world. And I'm sure that as authors, as writers, the world in itself takes a character of its own, because, well, as I just said, a lot of what a character does and doesn't do, a lot of what a character thinks and doesn't think, a lot of what is right and not right in the parameters of a character's moral codes is usually dictated by the world around him or her, the surroundings he or she functions in, and maybe even the situations he or she finds themselves in, as well as the social constructs of the world. For example, in this case, in our world, the way we use he or she as a default, and we are slowly moving on to understanding that sex is a social construct. Maybe in their world that hasn't happened yet, especially when we talk about historical and mythological fiction. It definitely hasn't happened yet in the world of the characters we are writing about. Given that situation, we need to think about a lot of things when it comes to world building. First, the geography of the places that the character goes to comes from the modes of travel, what kind of time period you want the world to be in, because your historical fiction can actually be accurate to the time period, or it can be historical fantasy, or maybe you're making a fairy tale world and you want it to float around timelessly. So a lot depends on the language you use to build up your world, to build up the various cultures that might populate your world. Or if your world is homogeneous, then why? So when you're trying to write about a world, try to think from both a reader's and a writer's perspective. The way I try to do that personally for me is I type out a sentence in my character's point of view. For example, in my work, my main character, he met people from a different culture, a very different culture than his. So since he has been taught that those people aren't people, they're actually animals and savages and uncivilized people, his reaction at first is of prejudice, because that's what he's been taught. That is a major part of world building, because a lot of cultures, unfortunately for humankind, have the impression that they alone are superior and others don't matter. But again, it depends on the world building you do, on the culture that you choose to build. Maybe your world is something that accepts all kinds of people, all creeds. But again, in every world, intentionally or not, there is some kind of a social strata that we need to think of. And while writing, we also need to think of our character's place in that particular social strata. For example, there's a work I thought of writing about the Russian Revolution, focusing majorly on the royal family. So a major part of what was world building for that particular book was me reading about the royal family and finding out that they were very isolated from the world around them. Whatever news and information they got, it was filtered in through a lot of channels, most of them pro-royalist channels. So that, filtered their worldview. The sanitized world they were showed is actually, it was in a very large contrast to what the actual state of the kingdom was. So again, when you think about your character, you need to think about whether the character in question is a person who falls under the lower socioeconomic strata of the society, or whether he or she or they even are a lord, a lady, or a princess, a knight, a fairy, all kinds of whatever species you choose to integrate, whatever social strata you choose to integrate, because there has to be something, some order of society. So you'll have to think about rules for each strata, about how they behave with each other, the socio-cultural norms that we follow in our society. And the one tip I would have for you, in case you're writing a historical story, go for, accounts of that particular time period. People would have written books about that time period, about the time in question. There would be maybe even stories you can get inspiration from, or you can see, if you are actually basing it on real world history, then you can see how society has evolved over the hundreds of years humankind has existed. But if you are evolving a mythical kind of world with mythical creatures, mythical folks, mythical races, then in that case you will have to spend a lot of time on what creature interacts with what creature, what kind of enmities are there, what kind of political currents are there. Not political per se, perhaps we're talking about beasts, but who likes who doesn't like who, what kind of prejudices and stereotypes are there, and another thing when you come to this kind of world building, because the character in himself, herself, themselves is also interacting very, very closely to this world. So a lot of what makes your character who they are is the way they react. Something I have read in a book I read long ago, I don't remember the book, but I remember the line is, you should not judge yourself by your first reaction, your instinctual reaction, because that's what you've been taught since childhood. That's what has been drilled into you. You should judge yourself by the second reaction you have to a particular situation, because that's what you think. For example, in my story in Antratman, I've talked about Arjun before in my first video I did. So he's a prince and he is meeting with people of other cultures that I just said that, they're alien to them, and his is kind of a xenophobic culture that doesn't accept all kinds of people. So his first reaction is, are they people? But his second reaction is what I have been taught right? His second reaction defines who he is. He's a person who questions things. He's a person who's curious. He's a person who learns by looking around him. So just like that, you can have your characters involved with the world around them. If they're meeting someone, how do they react the first time? How do they react the second time? How does a relationship with the world around them evolve as they age and grow? And that also forms like a very, very important part of the world building. And then comes politics. I am not a particularly good player at politics, nor am I particularly good at writing it, to be honest. But one thing that has helped me is, have a basic idea of the political factions you will want in your world. For example, since I'm writing about ancient Indian culture, there are castes, and they have some, preordained, predefined roles assigned to them. So I'm sticking to the culture of that I know of. So in case you're making a new culture, then all the very best to you. I don't have a lot of advice, but all I can say is, find some real world counterparts that you can base things off, because creating a completely new alien culture, if you manage to do it, it's a great job. But since all of us are people, something or the other will definitely be based on what we do, what we think, and that has to be considered as far as I can see it. So with world building, as I said, if you're talking about the geography, it's like, think about the terrain of the country you're writing about. For example, if I'm writing about India, the northern parts are extremely mountainous, the southern parts are at sea level because it's a peninsula, and in the middle you have hills, you have forests, and wherever your character goes, integrate clues so that the reader knows, okay, oh, he's here. Like, maybe not exact geographical clues, but something that makes the reader go, oh, this is a mountain. For example, I had Arjun shiver a lot and stumble through snow. So that gives the reader an idea that, okay, this is northern India because I've specified that in my story. If he's shivering and struggling to climb a hill, then he's probably in the northern part of India. Equally, when I talk about people having different languages than his, it means he's moving away from the kingdoms he's familiar to. He's moving towards the south because the sea salt is described. You can describe the languages of people, the accents, the dialects, which form a major part of your word building. For example, some people might have a guttural, nasal kind of accent. Some people might have a sing-song accent. Some people, like, even the same language, if two different people are talking, you have regional accents. Utilize that. That gives a beautiful dimension to your word building because it will seem realistic. And when we are on the topic of world building, there's also another thing I want to talk about when it comes to rounding out the world you're building as well as your characters, and that is consistency. Like, we're authors, we're writers, we get a lot of ideas. A lot of ideas are bouncing around every day, and as we write, our ideas might change, they might shift shape, they might evolve into a new idea altogether. But for the love of your work, please be consistent. If you have written something already, please check in on it. Please make sure you're consistent with what you've already written. For example, if you have written that your country has a mountainous terrain in a particular area, and then you suddenly change it to a plateau or a plain, and then the reader will be confused. The reader will not be able to get inside the world you're trying to build. But in case you're changing it to a plateau, then change it everywhere. Do not let the reader be confused between a mountain and a plateau. That, as well as the dialects you're using, the cultures you're using, if they're clashing, then make them clash in a realistic manner. Build a complex story that this culture clashes with this culture because of this reason, which has been evolving since this. Do not give the whole story, of course not, because no character will be talking about their whole ancestor story. But give subtle hints. Like, I have heard in legends and fables that so-and-so has happened, so I will not trust this person. Or the sound, the dialect that this person has shows that he's from there, so I tense. Because I know that from my ancestors' point of view, from the point of view of the people who've taught me all my life, that person can't be trusted. Something like that. I'll actually give you a more detailed way of this in my next video, because this is meant to lay a groundwork. And while we are on the topic of consistency, a very important part of consistency is your character consistency. Make sure your character is acting in a way that is in character to that particular character most of the time. If you want to make that character act out of character, for example, if it's a young boy who is usually usually friendly with his family, usually smiling and laughing with them, and he suddenly shuts down, give a reason for the boy to shut down. What caused the boy to shut down? Did his family place too many expectations on him? Did they aggravate him too much? Are there a lot of microaggressions? Is there a question on his identity? Is he going through an identity crisis? What age is he? What is he going through at this point of time that he shut down on his own? So there has to be a reason for your character to act inconsistently, a reason for your world to alter. So alterations are okay as long as you explain them in story with reasons. For example, my main character, Arjun, he stops talking to his family for a while, which is very in contrast with the boy who usually mediates when his family fights. But he stops talking because his loyalty has been questioned. And to him, his loyalty to his family is a very, very big part of his identity. So he's going through an identity crisis. So he shuts down. See, a lot of people have different ways of coping. Some people talk too much. Some people just shut down. So it depends on the particular character how they act, usually, and when they are in extreme stress or tension. So show the tension. Don't tell that Arjun is tensed. Then in that case, the reader will be like, okay. But if you are showing by some cue that he is thinking about something, he's not able to talk to people he usually talks to, he is wondering if he's wrong, if he's actually loyal, if he has based his identity on a lie all this time, then, the reader gets to know your narrative tension. The reader gets to know your character's tension. Why is he tensed? That's what you want your reader to do. You want your reader to understand the world as well as empathize with the characters that you have created. So this, I guess, ends my groundwork video for world building as well as character consistency. I'll see you again, hopefully on 11th or 12th, as soon as I can get the video up. So yeah, sorry that this video is a bit late, a bit behind schedule, but real life's coming up in the middle and I have a ton of exams to go through. So thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Right. I realized that I already said a bye, but then again, I'm sorry for boring you more. I just realized that I haven't answered Max and Dip's questions, nor have I asked my own question. So Max asked about immediate and long-term goals in my writing. So at the time of his video, my immediate goal was to finish chapter 7 of my ongoing novel about the Mahabharata, which I already have done. So as of now, my short-term goal is to finish the the second plot arc and the first overarching plot arc of the book without much complications, which isn't going really well because the ending of that particular arc is fraught with complications. But that's my immediate goal, to finish this. The first overarching arc has about 3 parts. I'm done with the first 2. The third part is taking some time because it is a very delicate and a sensitive area. And hopefully I'll be done with that soon. And as for long-term writing goals, well, I think Antratman as a whole is a series of 3 to 4 books, and that will take years to finish. So that in itself is a huge long-time writing goal. But I also wanted to branch out a little and expand a very fond idea of mine, which mixes sci-fi with mytho-historical fiction, and at least begin with the world building of that particular book, which is tentatively named Prescience as a working title, but hey, let's see. And Dibs asked about what I usually think of in my writing. So in my books, since I write with a first person point of view, something I think about a lot is whether I'm making the character I'm writing a self-insert. That is, whether I am adhering to the values of his world as I should, as I talked about in the earlier parts of the video, instead of my own. Because this is a problem we face, especially when we write historical or mythological fiction, that the moral codes of the world that we write are very different from the moral codes of the world that we live in. Something that too many people with selective reading thoughts have pointed out as, this particular character isn't a good person because according to the morals of this world, what he did back then is wrong. And I respect your right to have an opinion about historical periods and times, but in my own humble opinion, in my work, I will be writing about a character in the status quo of his world, of their world, and not mine, because I don't want to mix circa 3000 BC with the 21st century AD, because that would not make sense at all. So that is something I think about, whether I'm making my character a self-insert or not. And I also write characters who I personally don't like. So a lot of my thought process when I'm writing that particular character is whether I'm rounding that person out as a character instead of focusing specifically on my personal dislike over that character to what he, she, they do to my main character. So a lot of time I spend on rounding these characters out that I particularly don't like much. And that is what I think about a lot in my writing. And one thing I should be thinking of is actually cultural sensitivity, because the mythology I write about is very, very dear to the cultural meshwork of my country, of what makes us. So I need to be very sensitive when I'm writing about that. And I also think that I should be thinking of, situations with a more objective eye, at least when I'm planning things, at least a little bit, instead of, sticking to the very narrow first person perspective I have of my main character, which is why I try to write points of views of different characters when I discuss with my beta readers. But I think that is a process that's very, very enjoyable, and also something I should be doing more. So I hope that answers your questions, Max and Dibs. And the time's here for my own question and the actual ending of this video. So thank you so much for sticking to this for this long. And my question is to Max and Dibs. When you write, is your writing process plot driven or character driven? If it's either of the following, why do you say so? Yeah, so that's it. And with this, actually, bye. See you later. See ya. Bye bye.